All right, so the Love is Blind reunion just came out. I just watched it. Just as it came out, I finished it. I'm here to talk to you guys about it.
Welcome to the Love is Blind reunion.
The thing I love about these reunions is they are very current. They are filmed a year after the initial show is filmed. So you get a lot of stuff addressing the internet discourse and things that went viral from the initial Love is Blind season in this reunion. Let's just get straight into it. We're first going to talk about the toxic couples, the couples that broke up, and the interesting, juicy things about those couples. And then we'll talk about the successful couples at the end. So first off, let's start with Ramses and Marissa. Now, if you've watched my previous Love is Blind video, you know I was not a fan of Ramses. I was not a fan of his contraception conversations. Pretty much any conversation he had with Marissa, I thought was pretty awful. I thought he was definitely a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I find it interesting, the reunion, right? Because he comes off a lot more measured, a lot more balanced. It almost feels like he's dropped this nice guy act he was putting on. He has been humbled. Like throughout this reunion, you just see him in the background, like holding back tears, even when people aren't talking to him directly. Like he is clearly broken.
We're all human. I was fucking that man. Like we all do crazy shit.
And a shell of who he used to be. It literally feels like he's just thrown in the towel and be like, man, this shtick wasn't even working for me anyway.
You know, I didn't come into this experiment wanting to devastate anyone or break them.
So first off, Ramses says that the reason him and Marissa weren't going to work is because their energy was mismatched. And while I do kind of get what he's saying, I think he just needs to give a better explanation. It still feels incredibly wishy-washy. But the first great moment of the Ramses interview is when Marissa's mother actually says that she's glad he ended it with Marissa because Marissa would have been carrying the relationship. Just a great burn at Ramses. And I really like Marissa's mom. I have to say, I've liked her the entire show and I think she comes off really well this episode. I also think what Marissa's mother had to say about he should have been honest about the problems he was having leading up to this rather than reassuring her that everything was okay every time she asked is actually really valid criticism. Like she was completely blindsided because he never raised these issues before. I think it's a really good point that Marissa's mother raised, right? The fact that if you're constantly reassuring her, that's why this is so hurtful. That's why it feels like such a betrayal. Next, Ramses addresses the contraception issue, the thing that most people have had an issue with him over, and he says that he was never setting her an ultimatum.
I wanted to clarify at no point that I ever tried to present Marissa with an ultimatum.
To have condom sex from here on out. It's not really enjoyable, baby. Sex is supposed to be like mutually enjoyable.
She had very valid reasons as to why she didn't want to use hormonal contraception. I'm well aware of the effects it has on a woman's body.
Like it's not something that guys, ever have the pressure to having to think about.
And so I would never try to force that upon her.
It's not really enjoyable, baby.
We had a conversation about multiple methods. It was a very nuanced conversation.
Sex is supposed to be like mutually enjoyable.
Unfortunately, this reads as lip service. When you're listening to him, it sounds like the right thing, but when you think about it for a second, he was setting an ultimatum, saying to your partner, hey, like, we can use a condom, but sex just isn't enjoyable, and you should want sex to be enjoyable for me. That is subliminally setting an ultimatum. It is making her feel like shit for doing a safe precautionary thing. And I outlined in the initial video that I had issues with how Marissa conducted that conversation too, but at the end of the day, Ramses was being incredibly manipulative, incredibly calculated, and just totally put his pleasure before any other needs. But on top of that, the implication that sex is just a shit experience if he has to wear condoms was a shitty ultimatum-like thing to do. And no matter what he says or what was or wasn't said after that scene was shot, he still did say that, and I have always thought that was an incredibly shitty thing to say. So unfortunately, he's not off scot-free. And what I love is after he gives this in-depth explanation into his comments, the Lachey's don't even dignify it with a response. They just go, anyways, talk about wrap it up. Let's move on to the next person.
So we could wrap it up. This conversation.
And we shall do the same now, because now we have Nick and Hannah. And I was not a fan of Hannah. I feel like most of the human population was not a fan of Hannah in the initial run of Love is Blind Season 7. And she doesn't come off particularly great here either. However, unfortunately, I think Nick comes off not great in this section either. So first off, this conversation opens with Hannah saying that she still wouldn't have ridden the ducks. Again, I feel like her not riding the ducks was just a really mean, cold thing to do. Really just yucking his yum, in my opinion. Garrett says he's impressed with Nick's patience, and it cuts to Hannah's face and she is clearly fuming. Just a great moment.
Nick demonstrated a lot of patience that I never would have had. So I'm very impressed by that, and I knew he was a good dude, but yeah, I was definitely impressed by his patience throughout the whole thing. So.
And then basically the Lachey's spend like a substantial amount of time trying to get an apology from Hannah to Nick. And for a long time, she is really doing her best just not to give him one. She basically says like, this is who I am. I can be a bit of a bitch. And you are just waiting for her to say sorry. Eventually, though, you do get the apology from Hannah to Nick where she says, I'm sorry I was so cruel to you. I genuinely am, which is a nice moment. But then in an interesting moment, Nick comes off really well where he starts saying like, hey, like the online hate for Hannah has been too much. And then Hannah swoops in and says, if that's the case, why have you been liking hate comments towards me?
Hannah's fantastic. She's been getting way too much hate online for just being the type of person she is and being, you know, super transparent. Like, we need more of that, right? And she's received way too much hate.
Why are you liking the hate comments then that people are leaving on your page?
Steven confirms that Nick was talking shit about Hannah, this idea that he was comparing her to a grenade, saying she was a 5 out of 10. These things don't look good and inform maybe why Hannah was the way that she was. Again, this is all he said, she said. And I do think Hannah still needs to be held accountable. However, I do think it removes some of Nick's victim potential here. I think he comes out of this reunion not looking as overall sympathetic as he did initially, which I guess is a shame if you've been really rooting for Nick. But I guess what I find interesting and kind of hilarious is Ramses gets absolutely just slaughtered in the crossfire of this conversation. Marissa starts defending Hannah and basically starts going like, oh, you know, Ramses sucked, but yada, yada, yada. And then in a great moment, she goes, yeah, we all make mistakes. I mean, I was fucking Ramses.
She invited me over a month after the show to hang out.
Because we're all human. I was fucking that man. Like, we all do crazy shit. It's a breakup.
If she really hated
I invited you back because I just want to have sex with you one time just to make sure it wasn't that bad.
And you can see that Ramses is like done. Like, he's already dead and Marissa is just like slaughtering him. And like, look, rightfully so, but I love that it cuts to Marissa's mum and you can see that her mum's almost a bit disappointed in her, like almost this thing of like, be the better person. I like the call out she did at Ramses, but it definitely is getting in the mud with Ramses. I think overall you can see in the background throughout this episode that Ramses is just done with life. Like, he's completely checked out and he's really had to do some self-reflection since the show has aired. But then the argument peaks in a really interesting moment when Nick says, if you hated me so much, if I'm such a terrible person, why did you invite me over a month after our relationship ended for a one-night stand?
She invited me over a month after the show to hang out.
To which Hannah says, I invited him over to have sex a month after to make sure it wasn't that bad.
We're all human. I was fucking that man. Like, we all do crazy shit. It's a breakup.
If she really hated
I invited you back because I just want to have sex with you one time just to make sure it wasn't that bad.
She hated the type of person.
Which is a really cruel thing to say. Also, if you didn't have subtitles on and weren't paying close attention, you may have missed this. But it's a really cruel and weird thing to say and kind of like skirts around this incredibly valid point that Nick is making, in my opinion. And then finally, we have this confrontation between Hannah and Katie. And I thought Katie came off really measured here. I thought Katie came off really maturely. And her addressing the unfortunate rift between her and Hannah and the fact that she didn't like what Hannah was saying about her all came off like really, really good. But I also thought Hannah's apology to an extent came off well. But I think it is really telling that Hannah let her struggle and suffer in silence for over a year. Really telling. And you see that Marissa's mum actually echoes this sentiment by whispering that to Katie when she says she made you feel like shit for a year.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Like, I really like Marissa's mum. I think she actually has a really good moral compass and you can tell that she's measured when she needs to be and fiery when she needs to be. I really like Marissa's mum throughout this reunion special. Next we have Leo and Brittany. In the biggest understatement of the year, Leo says that he thinks he overcooked it a bit when it comes to talking about money. Like, yeah, absolutely. And we have this awful Nick Lachey tennis pun about love meaning nothing, and in their relationship love also meant nothing. Nick Lachey, the Lacheys in general need to be stopped, right? Everything I know about the Lacheys is against my will.
Whole season was giving me all the feels.
Yeah, she had all of it.
They are the worst part of these Netflix reality shows. Their puns are awful. I think Vanessa Lachey genuinely comes off as a pretty good host. And I feel bad saying this, but I think Nick Lachey is just always coming off incredibly uncomfortable. His banter is always really strange. I don't know why in every single show he does, he makes all these jokes about how desperate he is to hang out with the people. Like, even in this Leo and Brittany section, he ends up saying like, Leo, I would have loved to have hung out with you in the men's lounge.
Can I say something, man?
Yeah.
I would have loved to have hung out with you in the men's lounge for a couple weeks. I really,
Hey, wow, thanks.
It's great to talk to you, man.
Likewise, Nick.
Like, why are you saying this? Like, so much of these reunion specials are devoted to like deep diving Nick and Vanessa Lachey's like personal idiosyncrasies and their relationship. Like, it's too much Lachey content. It needs to stop, in my opinion.
It's the best.
Best to be spend every day with your best friend. And we're loving the new look. We've already alluded to it.
Thank you.
Is it safe to say we can call this Taylor's version?
This is Garrett's glow up era.
Garrett, is it safe to say that she's filled a blank space
Here we
in your
go.
fashion world?
Here we go.
The puns are great. Dad jokes are coming in.
I mean, if you don't like them, you can just shake it
No,
off.
they're
But regardless, back to Leo and Brittany, we have this section where Leo starts comparing women to pasta and steak and then proceeds to say that, but you know, it's different because in this situation, the food has feelings. Like, just an unhinged thing to say. Then Vanessa proceeds to say, hey, women don't like being compared to meat. And then Steven of all people chimes in and says, hey, like, apparently I'm fine with being compared to meat. So, I mean, take that how you will.
I actually understand what you're saying, but I think that women probably don't want to be associated with being steak or pasta.
I'm all right with being associated with meat, apparently. So.
And it's like, first off, Steven, what do you mean apparently? Like, you're the one that was constantly walking around being like, you know, treat me like a piece of meat. Use me, it's fine. Like, Steven, you're the one that did that. No one else said that. No one else made up rumors that you like being objectified. You were actively telling Monica all the time that you want to be objectified, that you want her to sleep with you. You were doing that. You were constantly sexualizing things. No one else was. Like, why are you saying that? Why is Steven the way that he is?
Nobody wants to believe me.
I just want to take a second of your time to tell you about memberships to this channel. So for a small cost, you get access to basically a book club, but for movies and TV shows. Right now, we're covering Tell Me Lies Season 1. So every week, I'm covering an episode of the show. And then we all go and watch the other episode, which I then proceed to talk about the next week. And then after that, members will be able to vote on which series or movies I cover next. On top of that, every 2 to 3 weeks, I cover everything I have watched that I haven't been able to talk about on the channel in basically a quick podcast. So you get all of that in the membership. I really would love if you consider getting a membership to this channel. It helps out the channel massively. It means I can also produce content for you that is a bit less censored and uses more copyright footage and just is a bit more free flowy. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, please consider getting a membership. Thank you so much, and back to the video. Next, we have Leo apologizing to Hannah. I actually felt like he came off really earnest here. I actually thought this section did a good job of redeeming Leo a bit. Again, his actions were pretty inexcusable, but I feel like outside of the pods, he actually came off okay in this reunion. He's just a bit of a quirky, weird guy, and he definitely faltered in the pods a lot. But in this section, I sort of softened on him a bit. Out of all the apologies we got this episode, I thought his apology to Hannah was one of the most earnest, especially when he said, I'm sorry for asking you to lie that the breakup was mutual. That genuinely felt like it was from the heart, so credit to him.
Towards you in that night and morning conversation, the amount of shame that I have, the temper tantrum that I threw, and then in the morning, for me, how delusional I was for me to call our breakup mutual, like, I got dumped. Then to put you in this weird position of, like, putting in a good word for Brittany that was so weird and strange, and, like, I wanted, like, hell would be being locked in a dark room, being forced to rewatch that scene over and over again.
All right, next we have Steven and Monica, and I could talk about this all day. Steven is a menace. He needs to be stopped. He needs to be fucking neutered.
So anyway, how about anal, huh?
What?
God, I could win a Nobel Prize if I had a vagina.
All right, like there is something NQR with Steven and his sexual proclivities and just having to insert them everywhere. Like, he is what harassment cases are made of. So first off, he opens by saying that the tech stuff is really juicy and of course you want to get into that. It's like, bro, like, this is incriminating for you. Why are you bragging about this?
Steven, tell us what was in the text.
Oh yeah, I know they're pretty juicy. I don't remember. I really don't. I deleted them.
So during a...
Then he proceeds to say, oh, out of respect for the person, I won't get into the text. And it's like, you can talk about the text without naming her. I actually think that's okay. But also, yeah, you did air it out on reality TV. Like, you shouldn't have cheated with her on reality TV if you're so worried about that, as Monica says. But again, also, like, you can read out text. Just don't give the name. Like, it's fine. You know, that's not the reason. Like, don't pretend you're a virtuous person. Monica rightfully says, like, interesting you want to show her so much respect when you didn't show that respect to me. Also, Steven then says, like, oh, you know, Monica and I went on a date and then I wrote a letter to her parents, and Monica tears him a new one and says, actually, it wasn't a date. And I knew you were going to mention this. I knew you were only writing that letter to mention it on the TV. And look, I do get to an extent wanting to outline what he's done to repair, but yeah, when he like mentions that forthcomingly that quickly, I totally get Monica's read here that he was only doing that to kind of like redeem himself in the public eye. I think Monica is bang on the money here, and I feel like Steven's gaslighting a bit by being like, nah, that wasn't my intention, like you're reading too far into things. I think she was spot on. That is definitely what he was doing. Just the way it came out definitely feels a bit sus. But then we have this absolute victim puke from Steven.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't trust me, then there's nothing that I can say that'll change anybody's mind. So nobody's really wanted to listen to me from the beginning. I want to hear. I understand that. I'd love to tell it. But to be honest, I don't think anybody believes me, wants to hear. So at the end of the day, why should I? Nobody wants to believe me.
You know, I mentioned in my initial video that I hate the feeling I get of these men that have been to therapy and learned therapy speak in order to weaponize it and kind of smooth over their personality flaws with their love interest, right? I hated how Steven initially framed his cheating to Monica, you know, being like, you know, that's just part of life's journey and we grow from these things. And like, technically it was cheating, but like, you know, like it depends how you look at it. But like, yeah, definitely like something that I've like learned from, you know, like crazy. It's like, I hate it, you know, just show some actual remorse instead of this weird softening of your own shortcomings.
We went through therapy. We figured it out. I'm actively in therapy to talk about these things.
And the reason I say all this is because I get the same feeling when Steven does this complete victim puke and starts going like, you know, no one wants to hear my side of the story.
Nobody cares about my side of the story. I acknowledge 100% that I messed up. I've done everything.
I've been to therapy and I've read all these books and I've shown remorse for my cheating.
That I thought I could do. I talked to my parents. I asked them what I should do. I've done what I'm supposed to do. I've read books. I go to therapy. I do all these things. At the end of the day, nobody cares.
It's like, first off, you cheated once, told Monica, and then you cheated again on Monica. Like, have you grown that much? Also, it's been a year. Like, this is very much relevant and fresh.
Because you keep cheating. No, because if they did, we wouldn't be here right now having more accusations about something that we squashed a year ago.
And also, it's just this insane thing where it feels like because people aren't forgiving him as quickly as he wanted to be forgiven, because people are really mad at him for how he behaved in his airtime on Love is Blind, he's deciding to frame himself as the victim and be like, what do you want from me? Like, I've done the inner healing. Like, forgive me, God.
How much more responsibility will I have to take? I had a moment of weakness where somebody texted me and they were talking about a heart condition.
It's just so weird. And this tangent goes for a substantial amount of time. But then finally, we actually get some clarification as to what the texts were. So basically, according to Steven, the conversation went as follows. So this girl texted him about having a heart condition and then proceeded to follow that up with like, also like, I'm into some new fetishes. And then Steven went, fuck yeah, tell me all about it.
Understanding that this is probably a reaction or a conversation that I should not entertain, I was still curious how you made this jump, so I said, what kind of fetish is it?
And he decided that was emotional cheating and didn't want to entertain it any further. Now, Monica disputes this slightly because she says that she like scrolled down and they've been talking for ages. Steven then says he hadn't talked to her outside of that night, but then also seconds later says he'd been talking to her for years. He also says that he doesn't delete text messages, even though literally in the show, he said to Monica that he deleted the text messages. Like, this guy is a terrible liar and he can't even get his story straight.
This is the man I don't want to be, but I never deleted it.
Okay, let me see your phone.
I deleted the message.
He proceeds to brag that he doesn't hide text messages. He has an open phone policy. And like, if I'm doing something wrong, I deserve to be caught. Then Monica completely demolishes him by saying, well, just don't do something wrong. Next, we have Alexandra and Tim. And this is probably the most confusing section of the entire episode because I have conflicting feelings on this one. Either party I listen to in this situation, I start siding with. The more I listen to one side, the more I start getting their POV. And then when I hear the other side, I start hearing their POV and start getting where they're coming from. Like, it's a really difficult dispute to try and unpack. Compared to these other couples where there's a clear villain, I actually get both sides in this situation. Initially in my first video, I did side with Tim. However, there are moments here where Alex makes a really compelling case in her favor. So first off, for example, the kind of like irredeemable thing she did in an early on fight, right, where she covered Tim's mouth. She says she only did that because she was trying to quiet him so the the producers didn't hear him yelling. She was doing it as sort of a protective measure because she didn't want him embarrassing himself, which is a really interesting point to make and something that I thought made her side of the story more compelling. However, Tim seems really insulted by this suggestion. He then says that he was only yelling after she covered his mouth. I don't know. I think the issue is the way Tim says things. He says it with his chest. I don't feel like he's bullshitting. That's just my personal vibe. I feel like he genuinely believes what he's saying. He doesn't seem to be lying and bullshitting, in my opinion. But then when I hear Alex's side of things, she doesn't feel particularly bullshitty either. I would love to know what you guys think in the comments below. I will say about that first fight though, I think it's really bad to emotionally shut down on your partner. I know sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes things in life get too much, but I feel like if you don't communicate to your partner at least, like, hey, I need a second, like something's going on in my life, like it's not you, I just need to like have a shower and decompress. If you just start ghosting them and completely shut down and start silent treating them, of course they're going to get worried. Of course, they're going to start asking questions. If you then respond with anger, of course, things are going to escalate, you know? I get Tim's position here. I get what he's saying about, like, I was trying to talk to you and you were shutting me out. You weren't telling me what's going on. What am I meant to do? I do actually understand it. And I know it's very easy to say, like, we'll just give her some space. But I think in modern day relationships, I think it is really important to let the other person know what's going on, because obviously the other person is going to then internalize it no matter what, right? Like, if you shut down on someone, start blocking them out, there's no way they aren't going to take it personally. I think when we talk about the reason Tim dropped Alex completely, the reason the relationship actually ended, that's where things get really ugly. Because initially I was on Tim's side. I did think overall going to sleep when he had his family over for the first time, if it was down the line and they met a bunch of times, I think no harm, no foul. But I think the first time they're meeting, going to have a nap, I did think Alex was a bit bad for. This is where it gets really, I don't know how to feel. Because when I hear Tim's perspective, I still totally get where he's coming from. I get that it felt really disrespectful. I get that it feels like a double standard. Totally get it. However, when I hear Alex's side, she makes a compelling point, right? When she says that, like, you were probably looking for an out and this was it. I also feel like you were really trying to demonize me in that final chat. You were really projecting some things onto me, some anger and hatred towards me. I did feel like that. I mentioned that in the Love is Blind video I did, where I felt like some of the burns and the zingers he was adding in that final breakup felt a bit cruel and relentless. I think this conversation is really hard, and Vanessa Lachey actually has to step in and say, hey, you guys need to sort this out off air. This is just getting really ugly.
In his face, you said you wanted to be with me, and you had doubts the entire time. That was a bold thing to lie. I do this to save both y'all. I think it's safe to say, since you haven't spoken in a year, sorry to the audience, I'm sure you want the juice. I think you guys need to speak afterwards, privately.
I don't think we do at all.
It goes for a long time. You have to sit in it and watch it. And I think, yeah, every time Tim's talking, he's making really compelling points. He's refuting a lot of things and backing it up with his own POV. But then Alex does the same in really compelling ways. For example, Tim calls her out for having a nap. She then comes back and says, you know, I spoke to them for 5 hours and then just had an hour-long nap because I was doing my first night of overnight bartending. And you hear that and you go, oh, that's information we didn't know before. I kind of get where she's coming from. But then Tim challenges that by saying she was out clubbing the night before till 4 a.m. So that isn't that big of a deal. I also thought the points he was making about checking in on her tires and trying to show care for her were valid points. And again, leans into that initial narrative with that first argument about being shut out emotionally. But yeah, I actually thought Alex made some really good points here. I thought the point she raised about, you know, why were you meeting my father and all that if you were planning on dumping me? Both sides were making really good points. And by the end of this, I did not know how to feel. I'd love to know how you guys felt in the comments below. Next, we have Ashley and Tyler. This is one of our only successful couples, and hot take, I don't know if this is a hot take, I'm happy for them. I was really skeptical about them. Obviously, we all heard that he was a lot more involved in the kids than he initially let on. He also hid the whole sperm donation thing from her, but turns out no, like they were sperm donor kids. He is more involved due to things he revealed in this episode regarding the fact that that couple broke up, and I think his explanation holds water. It might be less juicy than we're all hoping for. I know we wanted to burn this man on the cross. I know we all were very mad at him, but I think he held his own really well. They look like a really healthy, functional couple. I think her defense of him holds water as well. I think everything she had to say about, like, you guys don't know our relationship the way we do. We've obviously had conversations off air. He was also trying to save face on air. You know, he was telling lies and misleading about things because he wanted to keep some things private. I think all of it made for really compelling compelling arguments in their favor, and I'm actually really happy for them. It was really weird. I wasn't rooting for them. I thought he was a lying piece of shit, but in this episode, I had to do a complete 180. I'm really happy for them, genuinely. I know that's a bit less juicy than we were probably all hoping for, but all in all, like, if they're happy and they've sorted out, like, who am I to judge, genuinely? And then finally, Taylor and Garrett. I mean, how good, right? How good. Now, Nick Lachey was just unbearable with his Taylor Swift puns, just one after the other. And even Garrett was like, whoa, yeah, you're killing me with these dad jokes. But yeah, no, I'm really happy for them. I'm glad Garrett was able to get past that weird, like, oh, I feel like you're being calculated by not telling me your race comment. Seems like he's been able to redeem himself. Seems like they're a really happy couple. Good on them. Like, I'm genuinely happy for them. Now, a few notes about the Love is Blind reunions in general. Can we stop with, like, the previous season's couples? It completely hurts the pacing. If I want to know about the previous season couples, I'll just go on Instagram. Also, I don't know how many people have actually seen every single season of Love is Blind. I feel like most of us have seen, like, what, season 4 onwards, maybe? Like, really? Like, I don't know about you guys, but I always find these sections hurt the pacings, and they must only have them there because otherwise there's only like 1 or 2 successful couples a season. Like, their success rate is pretty dog shit, and I feel like Netflix knows that. Also, I like Vanessa Lachey, and I'm sure Nick Lachey is a nice guy, but their banter could do with some work. Like, their banter is a bit rough. It's probably a tough gig to have to make jokes for hours on end and then be at the mercy of an unforgiving edit, but my God, some of the banter between the Lacheys and the rest of the people are just brutal. Anyways, regardless, that is everything I have to say about the Love is Blind reunion. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out my other video on Love is Blind Season 7. Please subscribe, and please let me know what you'd like me to talk about next.